Afternoon, I'm Theo Clarke, the Member of Parliament for Stafford, and I'm delighted to welcome you to today's meeting for the All-Party Parliamentary Group for Trade and Export Promotion. You may have noticed that I am not the usual chair of these meetings, but Gary Sandbrook unfortunately has a ministerial visit in his constituency, so I kindly offered to step in today with Lord Waverley to chair today's meeting. And I should add, I also have apologies from Baroness Mubarak, who I know has an amendment in the Lords today on the Nationality and Borders Bill. So I'm delighted that Lord Waverley is here with me as well, and I will be handing over to him to finish the meeting as we wrap up towards the end. But can I say a huge welcome to all of our trade parliamentary guests. I know we have Lord Gold from the House of Lords International Agreements Committee, Lloyd Russell Moyle from the House of Commons Trade Committee, Baroness Mayer, who is a fellow trade envoy like myself, this time to the Ukraine, Lord Popat, who is the trade envoy to Rwanda, Uganda and the DRC, Stephen Timms, the trade envoy to Switzerland and Liechtenstein, and last but not least, Marco Longhi, who is my colleague as the trade envoy to Brazil. And I should say a huge warm welcome to those of you just joining us to our supporter network. And this is a very active APPG on trade and export, now supported by over 280 organisations and more than 500 trade professionals. So from my perspective, certainly one of the largest APPGs in Parliament. And it's fantastic that the supporters network includes businesses, consumers, unions, civil society, diplomats, academics, and also economists. So I think together our network is now around 1 million companies of all sizes and sectors across the UK, with more than 10 million citizens and consumers and 20 million workers. So a fantastic platform to engage with fellow parliamentarians. And before we start the meeting, if I could just thank all of our supporter network who've been involved with sharing their reports ahead of today's meeting. In particular, I'd like to thank the British Chambers of Commerce, the Federation of Small Business, the British Exporters Association, which the UK Consumer Champion, the UK India Business Council, and the Resolution Foundation. So thank you all very much for your contributions. And just briefly to introduce the APPG to those of you who might be new. And the APPG on Trade and Export was very much set up to promote an inclusive, sustainable approach to global trade, and that involves all aspects of our trade agenda. So really for me, the mission and purpose is firstly to enable all voices to be able to participate in the national trade debate. Secondly, to bring all aspects of trade under one roof. So that's policy, exports, investment and finance. And last but not least, to promote sustainable green trade. And I should thank very much the ICC, who are facilitating it as our APPG Secretariat. And I do hope you can join us for future meetings. We tend to hold 4 of these meetings a year between our parliamentary offices and the supporter network. And I think it's a great opportunity for those of us in Parliament to engage directly with the UK trade community. We're really interested to hear from you, what are the issues and the challenges that you're facing? You do ask questions, and I think it helps to make a better trade debate in Parliament. So I'm now going to hand over to Chris Southworth, who is the ICC Secretary General and the Trade Director of the APPG, to moderate our discussion. And then I'll hand over to Lord Waverley to do some contributions and thanks at the end. But thank you for joining us, and over to you.
Thanks very much, Theo, and I'm deeply sorry for coming in late. I couldn't connect for some reason, but here I am. So this is obviously a fantastic opportunity for everybody now to, tell us what's going on out there. But I'm just going to pick a few people just to get us going, because we've been sent all sorts of reports and are aware of lots of really interesting work going on. So maybe if I can start with the BCC, Liam, I can see you on the screen. You've obviously just published this manifesto, which I think most of us have seen, but why don't you just sort of pull up the headlines of the manifesto and where you think Parliament and government could be supporting?
Kind of you to invite me, but I'm going to pass the baton to Shevaun, who's
Shevaun, sorry, I didn't see you there. That's great. Sorry.
That's quite all right. You gave Liam a small heart attack then, because he was like, no, I'm just here for the entertainment. Hi, everybody. My name is Shevaun Haviland. I'm the Director General of the British Chambers of Commerce, and I'm delighted to see a number of chambers on this call too. So I just thought I'd say a few words about us and what we're doing around trade at the moment. And thank you for the opportunity to say a few words. So the British Chambers of Commerce network, the BCC, was established over 160 years ago, but the parts of the network are much older than that. And indeed, we originally came into existence to support trade overseas. About 10% of UK businesses export, about 60% of chamber members export, which I hope gives you a good idea of the strength of our capability and capacity. At the BCC, we represent the 53 chambers of the UK. We have a team at the centre being that collective voice to government and media, but we have 76 and counting international chambers around the world. So it truly is a global network to deliver on that trade ambition. So we have very recently, 2 weeks ago, launched our new trade manifesto. That was very much about being that loud, proud voice for global trade. It is, as you know, I don't need to tell you the importance of global trade, but of course, it is the way we will be bringing money back into the coffers of the Exchequer for UK PLC. And of course, businesses that trade are more resilient, they're more sustainable, they grow faster. So it's really important. Within the manifesto, we outline some of the areas that we would like to see some policy changes, both in our relationship with the EU, our biggest trading partner, so improvements around trade processes, more easier rules around VAT, and a possible return of the SME support fund, but also more broadly, how we can help our SMEs make the most of the new FTAs. The Chamber network is incredibly strong on trade, and that is not just trade advice, that's trade documentation, customs documentation, and of course our international network. We recently did some research. We asked businesses who don't export what might be the one thing that would help them start exporting, and the number one answer was having a partner or distributor in the market in which I want to go into. So our international network is crucially important in delivering on trade. Last week, we did a parliamentary briefing with the APPG, chaired by our president, Baroness Ruby McGregor-Smith, which was gave us some really fascinating feedback from parliamentarians and some trade envoys around the piece. And we will continue our campaign for trade rolling out across the year. So it's great to be here. Happy to support, answer any questions, and look forward to working with you.
Terrific. Thanks very much, Shevaun. We'll come to sort of questions after. I just want to sort of get the conversation going, just whet the appetite a little bit with a few people who are doing interesting work out there. James, can I pull you in from the Federation of Small Business? You've also got the Ready to Launch report. And while I'm at it, I'm just going to give a heads up to a couple of people, Jane from Which and also Andy from the CBI. I'd like to sort of get some views in from you as well after James. But James, why don't you just sort of talk us through, you know, what the headline issues, challenges are from a small business perspective.
Thanks, Chris, and hello everyone. Pleasure to be here. Thanks for organising this. So yes, like Chris says, late last year we published the report Ready to Launch, and this really drilled down into what we think, what we think and what we thought needs to be in place to get more small businesses exporting and trading internationally in general. We've long said that the number of SMEs engaged in international trade in the UK could be doubled with the right support, and our Ready to Launch report really put forward some of those ideas. And we were very happy to see many of those ideas picked up in DIT's export strategy that was published in November. And now the focus really in these next few months is making sure, working with government to make sure that that export strategy is implemented and it works. You may have seen in our quarterly small business index that we publish, exporters had a very tough year last year, but a very tough Q4. and end to the year. And we're keen that the right support is put in place and it gets to the right companies at the right time, so that they can really bounce back as we emerge, hopefully, fingers crossed, from COVID and start trading even more around the world. And there are some things that we're excited to see. So changes to the International Trade Advisor Network, for instance, rolling out the Export Academy to more businesses across the UK, a replacement for the Trade Show Access Programme. These are all exciting things to see that we welcome, and we're eagerly working with government on next steps in making sure that those work for the smallest firms. Like BCC, we have a bit of a focus on the future trading relationship with the EU. We had the biggest changes in half a century come in last year, and lots of SMEs have been working very hard to adapt, but they have been struggling. And we continue to work with government on some solutions there, including around things like VAT and checks on products of animal origin. But beyond that, we're very excited by the FTA agenda and the hard work that DIT has been doing. Strongly welcome the trade agreements with New Zealand and Australia. Australia in particular is an important market for our members. It's a top 10 market, in fact. And we're looking forward to those being implemented and helping small firms make the most of them. Beyond that, the Canada renegotiation is attracting a lot of interest. Canada is a big market for our membership, and the launch of that later this spring will be a big moment as well. And we also watched the recently launched negotiations with India with great interest. India is a tricky market historically for SMEs, but it is a big prize. So we fully welcome the government's negotiating objectives there that we fed into, and we're really watching with keen interest in how those negotiations proceed. And beyond that, the US, in fact, is one of our members' top 3 markets. We're obviously aware that momentum has slowed somewhat there, but we are interested in just about anything that can make can open up that market even further, because our small firms, it's a huge market. It's often the next market that they go to after the likes of Germany and the Netherlands, etc. And we want to make the most of that. But very happy to take questions on any of that and to delve a bit deeper into the SME experience with international trade, because we've got work streams crossing the whole piece. Thank you.
Thanks very much, James. And just on the trade show programme, in our meeting with Minister Freer this week, as for the APPG, he actually raised that as an issue. He's aware that it's not a perfect programme, but it's an important programme, and is really keen to get feedback on that programme and how to improve it. So if any of you have inputs on that, his team are more than willing to hear more about it and what your views are. Could I just bring in Noreen, who's sort of one of our leading voices on women in trade, for a perspective. I can see your name listed. I can't see you on the screen, but could you come on and just sort of raise, key priorities, any asks, issues that you think Parliament should be aware of, or any way where you think you need some support from Parliament, government?
Thank you, Chris. I think there's always going to be support needed. Most of the businesses, women-owned businesses looking to export are small. We stand in a lot of the SME market side, so we will need support. We need signposting. We need networking and connections to be able to reach out. A lot of women-owned businesses are eager to trade internationally. They see it now as a way to move and discover new markets, especially following the resilience they showed over COVID. There's a lot of hassle still in the way between customs. The EU bloc is obviously still a big question and issue for most of us, but that's not just women-owned businesses. Plus all the digitization that's coming along, there's a lot of still worry and uncertainty about how that is going to be affecting and the extra workload that's going to be creating, even though it will be in the long run beneficial for everybody. So there's quite a lot that actually is on the table. Obviously, we're not ignoring the trade finance, all the usual issues that run across everywhere. So happy to continue contributing, Chris.
Great. And for those that don't know, Noreen is one of the leading voices feeding into the G7 of all places, or one of the places on women in trade. So a really key point. Andy, I've seen you come on camera. Could I come to you? Obviously, just set out, your key issues, priorities, where you would like us to be focused. But it would be useful just to hear just early thoughts, at least, on this new Trade and Services Commission, which is going to be crucial for the services industry. I'm aware that you're early stages, but just some early thoughts and insight onto that might be quite useful for everybody too.
Of course, Chris. Look, thanks for having me. Andy Burwell, International Director at CBI. I'm not going to repeat everything that James FSB just said. I agree with all of it, and it was very pertinent points, and the same also for Shevaun at BCC. I think from a CBI perspective, just run you through a few things. Firstly, look, I think DIT have done a great job. Should be recognised. Over the last few years has been pretty tough. Getting up to speed and delivering what they have delivered is hugely impressive. I suppose starting the FTA side, I think for our membership, India is the big one. Huge opportunity, hugely complex, as James said. But there is some commonality in India to other agreements as well. Be that on data, be it on IP, there are some common themes which run across all the trade agreements, including CPTPP, which really need to have a very joined up approach across government and a real understanding of how it contributes into the wider Global Britain agenda, but also to Noreen and others, the piece on equality and kind of the Build Back Better agenda. Key to that as well is its implementation of the FTAs. Really welcome Australia, New Zealand, obviously coming up hopefully thick and fast. Really, it's about the implementation of the export strategy, as James said, the implementation of the FTAs, making sure that business have the right information. It is tangible and easily digestible. There is a key role for organisations such as the CBI, BCC, FSB, and all those in this room to help with that. And it shouldn't be purely on the government steps. Businesses and trade associations also need to take a step forward and support each other in that space. I think more broadly on FTA than FTAs is obviously the market access piece. As James said, the US still hugely important, particularly at a state level. And we're doing a lot of work in that space and have started that engagement with DIT. I would also say the EU is in that kind of bucket as well. When you look at it, particularly from a services perspective, the bilateral relationships with EU states is just important as that sort of TCA relationship, because that is where a lot of the non-tariff barriers actually exist. So we've got a kind of key focus on that as well. And Chris is right. The services kind of runs through a lot of our work. When we published the kind of broader economic vision from CBI, Seize the Moment last year, we really identified that services are that kind of economic prize, that USP that the UK has. We are a services-based economy, and that needs to be reflected in everything we do. The Trade and Services Council was announced in the export strategy, coordinated by CBI, but really it is an industry-led body which sole purpose is to bring together and amplify what the industry is already doing. There's a lot of great work out there, but also to kind of identify and tackle a few key challenges which are pan-industry, and also broadly, not just on the kind of FS and professional business services side, but actually on the services that are embedded within goods or alongside goods, enabling goods exports, and those areas which are sometimes little understood, really contribute to economies up and down the country, and actually need to have a louder voice with a more joined up approach in government. So that's the kind of role of it. Probably looking to have its first meeting in March, and then more will come out on that shortly. Final thing would be around Global Britain and the role of trade within that, the role of business within that. Obviously, there is an ITC consultation out at the moment. I know there's a conversation as well as next week. So that is a significant focus, trying to work with FCDO and the wider government departments on what that looks like and how we can best engage to ensure that business and the role of business is fully engaged and embedded within Global Britain. I'll stop there. Thanks, Chris.
Brilliant. Thanks, Andy. Mark Ling, I'm going to come to you in a minute, so just give you the heads up on trade finance matters, but there's a couple of hands up, Angus and then Baroness Neville-Rolfe. Angus, perhaps if you'd like to go first.
Thanks, Chris. I was just going to pick up on CBI remarks about the importance of trade and services from financial services perspective, as I represent banking and payments industry through UK finance. Far and away the export success of the UK are services, and in particular financial services, where we generate the enormous surplus on trade, in fact, exceeding that of all other industries put together. And so we have a lot to say on what government can do and what Parliament can do in support of that, and to increase and sustain that export success, and indeed the related import openness, which is crucial also to that. I mean, and key to that is in our area the non-tariff barriers, i.e. how regulation needs to flex in order to accommodate the government's overriding public policy objectives on global Britain and trade. That's going to call for some pretty hard decisions at the regulatory level, where there are competing public policy objectives, and where the safe go-to place may not be, in fact, will be directly contrary to helping industry trade more and more profitably. I'll just stop there. Thanks, Chris.
Thanks so much for raising that, Angus. It's an important point. We'll come back to this trade finance, because obviously that's been a big part of what we were doing last year, just highlighting issues around trade, well, the trade finance aspect of the financial services. I'll just be a bit more articulate about that. Baroness Neville-Rolfe, you've got your hand up.
Oh, yes, thank you very much. And thank you for organising this and for inviting me. I can't stay that long because I've got a bill that I'm working on in Parliament, but I'm very interested in trade. I've been sort of a minister and done a lot on bills, but I'm also chairman of the UK ASEAN Business Council, which obviously operates in the sort of Indo-Pacific tilt area, and of Crown Agents, which exports things like vaccines and medicines and things to, particularly to Africa, obviously to developing countries. And it's very good that you've got together the small and the big. I've got a lot of time for the BCC and the FSB, who I work with on other things, and for the CBI. And I endorse what was said about services, because you're seeing not only in the areas where I have experience now, but just how all of the different services are coming forward: education, digital, sustainable finance. It's a long list, and we've really got to push that. And there's quite an opportunity post-COVID, as markets open up right around the world, I think, for us to get in there with some of these offers again, because people have rather forgotten what they've been doing. But my question, which I hope somebody might address, is what's the most important thing for the smaller operator? Because I actually agree that it's really important to get some of the smaller operators exporting. It seems to improve their almost domestic performance as well. And I think for this group, to find the clue to that, to help the DIT and others, would be very, very helpful. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, first and foremost. We have a number of people who could answer that question probably, but if I could maybe just bring in the voice of BEXA, but James or Shevaun, Noreen and others, you may well want to just jump in, so do put your hands up if you feel like you want to have an answer to that particular question. Do we have BEXA in the room?
Hi, Chris. Yes, you've got Marcus Dolman here.
Hi, Marcus. How are you doing? How about, do you want to like a stab at answering that question?
Can do, yes. I think the main issue, I think, from SMEs, from BEXA's point of view, I guess, is the access to finance. SMEs typically tend to have one banking relationship. It's done at a local level, and that local level banking doesn't necessarily have the knowledge and the experience to be able to give the SME the correct guidance to be able to get the export related products that they need to export. So I think an education piece is what's required to exporters, to get them talking to other finance providers, and maybe as well from the larger banks. I think you mentioned Mark Ling's here as well on this call, getting those guys to spread their knowledge out into their branch networks.
Fantastic. And we'll come to Mark in a minute in terms of what we're doing collectively and supporting from the APG to tackle the 2 billion trade finance gap in the UK, or what's estimated to be the 2 billion trade finance gap, with lots of work on digitisation there particularly. But James, do you want to, you've got your hand up. You want to come in?
Thanks, Chris. I would completely agree with the point on access to finance, actually, is one thing I would say, both in terms of the finance available from banks, but also making sure that there are products available from UK export finance, for instance, that work for SMEs, which has not always been the case. What I would say is that we know from previous research that by no means not the only source of advice and support, but the most popular source of advice and support is provided by government when it comes to exporting for SMEs. So getting that support right is pretty crucial, and creating a pipeline of firms that get the support they need at the right time. So whether that's someone completely new to exporting, getting advice and training from something like the Export Academy, or making sure that a business that's on the cusp, they've got a marketable product ready to go, they just need the advice on where to go, making sure that they meet an international trade advisor at the right time, or maybe they make the right connection with the FCO DIT overseas network, and really just making sure that whether you're a company of £250,000 turnover with 3 people, or whether you're a medium-sized company ready to go really big, making sure that the right level of support is available at the right time, I think is crucial. And there's a lot in the export strategy that tries to meet that. And I think there's a big piece of work now for government and business together to do, making sure that is implemented properly and gets over the line.
Brilliant.
If I might come back just before we finish on small business. I mean, when I was at Tesco in my main career, and certainly the posts, the overseas posts on places like Thailand were really, really important when you were going in somewhere for the first time. It was very, very helpful. So it was not only this end, but also the other end that it was important. And the other thing was other businesses who were trading in the areas were important as well, because you could ask them what mistakes they'd made. And, you know, they could sometimes help with things like the difficulties of banking and health and safety and all that sort of thing. Thank you.
Thanks very much. And Shevaun will probably have a say on this. Shevaun, you're next up with your hand, but we may have a view on people like UK IBC. I noticed Chris Corn's here from Turkey as well. So there's a very important resource support for SMEs in market there too. Shevaun.
Thanks, Chris. Yeah, so our research shows that there's the top 3 things to get small businesses exporting. One is that partner in the overseas market they want to go into. The second is sort of the research and understanding of that market. And the third is the ability to do a trade show, real or virtual. But we have on this call Peter, who runs our Myanmar chamber, and we have Richard, who runs our London chamber, both of whom are obviously experts in giving advice directly to small businesses. So I'm sure they'll have a really good view on that too, Chris.
Great, thanks so much, Shevaun. Noreen, you've got your hand up, and then I'm just going to switch to this finance point, because it is an important piece of the jigsaw that we do need to get right with Mark. So Noreen, you go first, and then we'll go to Mark.
Yes, I endorse everything that's just been said. I will just add on to it. The trade expos and the connections are seriously important, especially for smaller businesses who may not be able to just jump on a plane and go and visit other places at a whim because of the very size they're in. So being able to actually join something that's already organized, be it virtual or in face-to-face. I know that's been felt and it's mentioned a lot, saying we'd wish that come back. So please do not underestimate those. And as you said, the connections internationally and seeing the role models and being able to actually ask them for advice through OIT, which is the Organization of Women in International Trade. That is what we're trying to get them to do, which is connect and be able to share experiences, because even though they may be in separate markets, people open doors, and the foot on the ground, they're not going to have offices there immediately. They need to be able to locate safe and people they can connect with, people that are vetted, and maybe they can actually introduce them and open doors. So that is very, very important.
Thanks very much, Noreen. Some interesting stats on women in trade, by the way. Globally, 5 of 6 digital businesses are run by women. So digital trade is a big policy kind of channel there, opportunity. But actually in the European region, it's the opposite. It's 1 in 6. So there's clearly an issue in Europe that doesn't correlate with the rest of the world. So that's an important area to be looking at. Chris, you've got your hand up. I'll come to you next, and then I'm going to go to Mark.
Okay, thanks, Chris. Excuse me. Yeah, I mean, it's important at this point that's being made about having, the resources and the infrastructure in markets where UK exporters are looking to to engage. And one thing that I've always found difficult is to get the profile of what's available in market. So it's not a question of doing desk research and trying to find people who can help you. The resources are already there. I mean, the OBNI, that's what it was all about. It was joining up the dots and making sure that, there were organisations like the British Chamber in market who were providing all the services that made that journey as risk-free as possible. And that's still in place. And I know from Shevaun, the Manifesto on export, that covers that because all the overseas chambers are listed there with the contacts and the services that they provide. But we've really got to market that very, very hard to UK exporters because still they're not as aware of what is available overseas, and we need to do a lot more to get them involved and get them engaged. And it's something that we're doing together with the BCC and also working with our colleagues in DIT. And another area that is particularly interesting for me, I'm sitting on 2 boards that are supporting women, the Royal Society of Women in Science and Technology, and also I sit on the board of Haviland College, and we're offering bursaries to women engineers in marine. So there's a lot going on, and we really have to do more to get people aware of what is available and what's going on.
I think that's a good point. I think we'd all support that call to action. Well, thank you, Chris. Good to see you again. Mark, can I come to you on this finance point? I've just come out of a meeting with you from the International Working Group at UK Finance. So why don't you just give people a feel for what the amount of work that's going on globally, not just in the UK, on this whole digitalization, and why that is so important in getting the right level of finance into that SME community.
Sure, thanks, Chris, and good afternoon, everybody. In fact, I've had one of those days. So I've had the UK Finance International Working Group, and I've just come off a call, in fact, with BEXA and DIT and many others just recording a session for one of the industry sessions all about the same subject, really. I think the first thing I would say is, look, access to finance in the data we have, and we've been running our trade barometer now for a number of years. We've just finished the 12th edition last autumn. The next one will be number 13. So we've got over 1,000 companies are in that sample size, Chris. And I always say to people, it's not that finance is unimportant, but it's not the top priority. The top priority, as many have mentioned already, is access to new markets, understanding buyers, distributors, suppliers, help with bureaucracy, help with management training. These are the top agenda items for SMEs in the research that we have. And I'm happy to share with everybody on the call the link to the trade barometer. Everything we do in Santander is driven, our strategy driven. So we're very focused on how we can help unlock those challenges. At the same time, we're also looking at the finance issue and how we can make access to finance easier and simplified, I would say. So I turn away a little bit from what we're doing in Santander to what's been happening within UK finance, and specifically with UK export finance. So many, hopefully, of you will have heard about the launch last year of the General Export Facility. That was a big step change with UK export finance and indeed with the banks, where delegated authority was given to initially 5 banks. Now 1 non-bank is in there and others will come on. So I think it's New Day, who's the non-bank financial institution who have done a number of pieces of work with DIT and other players in terms of accessing markets. But fundamentally, we hope a lot more organisations will come and access the GEF facility in collaboration with UK Export Finance. So it's not the domain of the big sort of 5 banks at all, and we don't want it to be. But we've got it off the ground and it's running. It's been much more successful than we expected in the first year, but we're only scratching the surface. But the big thing with the General Export Facility is it's a facility and it's not tied to a specific export. So companies, can apply. Banks have got a delegated authority up to 5 million. There's no real ceiling, but typically you probably can get approval up to 25 million under GEF. It needs treasury support, but for the right businesses and the right opportunities, that will be forthcoming. But the big thing is it's not tied to a specific contract. It is, however, still true, it doesn't really work for the SME, right? Because you need to meet a minimum standard, and that often doesn't apply to an SME who's probably only got a year's track record and has got £500 worth of capital, even if they have got the potential to export somewhere. So it doesn't solve, it's not a panacea for everything, but it certainly goes a big way to trying to make sure that no viable export fails, which is again the mandate for UKF. So I think there's a lot of work there. I think there's quite a lot of new players driven by fintechs, but a lot of smaller players that are trying to see if they can develop a proposition for the smaller end of the market. We are certainly doing that ourselves in Santander, and I hope to have more news on that, probably in the next couple of months. But one of the big challenges for it, and this is where it brings back to the great agenda that you've been driving in ICC, Chris, is we need digitization to happen to lower the cost to serve and simplify the proposition so that SMEs can access it and understand there's a digital journey for them to go through, because they haven't got the bandwidth to understand some of the complexities of the historic way trade was done, and they don't need it, right? They need a very simple, effective and international working capital solution typically. So that's the first thing. So that agenda, that digitalization agenda, is absolutely key, and that needs law change, and that's what the ICC is driving in collaboration with a lot of people on this call. That will be the first thing. Then the second thing is that the financial crime agenda is really, really challenging for banks in particular, with the, whether it's the FCA or the PRA, and discharging our regulatory responsibility. Trade is considered as high risk. It's classified as high risk. That means there are lots of extra due diligence required. There are lots of checks and balances, there are transactional checks. It's a very, very complex and expensive proposition to deliver, particularly if you're still dealing with a lot of paper. So that has to change. I think we need to get to a better balanced model. We want to catch the crooks and criminals. We all want to catch them and stop, whether it's modern slavery, whether it's, just outright fraud, whether it's tax evasion, all those things we want to stop, obviously terrorists, etc. But we've got to strike the balance to mean making sure that the proper good businesses are not being hampered by our desire to catch these crooks and criminals. And then you can add into that little challenge, Chris, you can add in now the, COP26 and our ESG agenda, right? Which again, is going to make some of the supply chains more complex, is going to make checks and balances more complex. We need to change, but we've got to do it in a way that there's a global taxonomy, and we know what we're trying to do, we know how we're trying to measure it, and we don't, we don't interject in a lot of supply chains and make it very difficult for SMEs to do business. And otherwise we're going to hamper trade again, right? So there's quite a big agenda, but as I've said this morning on our call, I think there's a big groundswell of the ecosystem working towards trying to find solutions. COVID has actually helped us, to be honest, as it has with a number of things on the digital agenda. So people are serious about it. There's a lot of collaboration, there's a lot of alignment, and we've got to keep pushing through. We've got to a tipping point and we've got to keep going and drive it through. And then I think, a lot of the challenges that SMEs have got. There will be new ones, but we'll deal with some of the old ones that are on the table at the moment.
Thanks very much, Mark. And on the digitisation point, we'll obviously, we've got the Electronic Trade Documents Bill coming into Parliament in May, and then coming into force at the end of the year. It's on an expedited process through Parliament. So we will be supporting that from the APPG and trying to help give that a smooth run through. So anyone interested in that area, do give us a shout. We've got a number of parliamentarians on this call, so do please put your hand up if you've got questions to ask or any specifics you would like to know more about. We've got a lot of people on the call that we can draw on in terms of expertise, so please don't hold back. Unfortunately, the Trade Justice Movement and the TUC, just for our wider stakeholder community, aren't able to join us today. I think actually they're on a call with DIT, I've noticed, but we do have Jane Wallace from the consumer organisation Which, who have been very active in this trade space. Jane, can I just pull you onto the screen and give us an idea of what issues you have, what opportunities, what should we be aware of, what should we have on the radar?
Yeah, of course. Hi, Chris, and thanks so much for bringing today's meeting together. Apologies that I've only just been able to join, so I'm sorry if I repeat anything that's already been said or cover any ground that we've already gone over. Yeah, so from a consumer point of view, as many of you know, almost 2 years ago now, or 18 months ago, at which we did the national trade conversation around the UK to speak to UK consumers, build up their knowledge about trade, and then understand what their priorities were. Obviously, since then, quite a lot's happened. So back at the beginning of the autumn, we reconvened some of those participants from around the country and spoke to them about the progress that's been made to date. So we talked to them about the Australia Agreement in Principle, the UK deal with Japan, as well as some of the UK government's negotiating objectives, and we checked back in on where their views were. And the 4 areas that had really come through continued to be really strong priorities. So that was around maintaining health and safety standards for food and products, maintaining data security regulations that protect consumers' data and digital rights, protecting our environment, and using trade to help address regional inequalities. And when we spoke to people, what really came through in the autumn was that environmental protection aspect had really only strengthened over the last year since we'd spoken to them. It's really noticeable from our point of view. In general, there was quite a mixed view on what they felt about the progress that had been made. In a lot of cases, people didn't feel it's particularly clear actually what the impact was for consumers, and I think that's understandable. When we've looked at the impact assessments, they are very shallow when it comes to the consumer point of view. There was some optimism around some of the opportunities that the deals could bring, but to answer, there were probably more questions than answers that people had. The other thing we did alongside this was a UK-wide survey of 3,000 people. And what was really interesting here was we had this engaged group that we've worked with who are normal people from all sorts of backgrounds. And when we went back to them, they had said to us, oh, well, actually, I've seen New Zealand in the news. People had really kept up to date with the developments that had happened. So it just showed to us that once you whet people's appetites and you take that time to talk to them about trade, they do maintain an interest because they start to understand and comprehend more of the impact on their everyday lives. In contrast to that, when we surveyed 3,000 members of the UK public, it was really notable how little trade is cutting through. So when we asked people if they knew what stage negotiations were at, every time the largest group was don't know. And the highest portion that were correct was 28% of people, and that was where the UK negotiations were at. So even at that point, obviously a deal had been struck with Japan. There was a reasonable amount of coverage on that, but just shows that isn't cutting through. Yet in contrast with the group that we spent time with, I know Chris and many others on this call kind of gave their time to talk to that group. They'd really maintained that interest and progressed it. So that's where we are from a research point of view. We won't take up too much more time. On progress, we were thrilled to see a consumer chapter in the Agreement in Principle with New Zealand. That's a real world first. It looks to be quite narrow, focusing on consumer protections, but we do think there are real opportunities to use that precedent to expand that in future deals. So we're really supportive of that, really pleased to see that DIT have got that result. And I think that's Oh, and then the other kind of outstanding areas, as you know, food standards, we're very closely monitoring, and we do have some questions, you may already have covered this, around the Australia deal, and we're very keen as well to bottom out the difference of views that I think there are between stakeholders and also the department on data flows, and particularly what that means for third countries. But I'll stop there. That's a quick summary, and I'll post a link in to our national trade conversation follow-up work, so you can see that.
Fantastic. Thanks very much, Jane. Always good to hear the consumer view, I think. Do please post links into the chat room or share them. That would be fantastic. We may want to come back to the environment point, actually, by the way. So just bear that in mind, everybody, that we've got a big new COP15 biodiversity agreement coming into place, which is on the same scale as the Paris Climate Agreement. It's huge. So there'll be a swathe of regulations, rules, laws, standards, all coming in that kind of space. So if you think we should perhaps do an evidence session in that kind of area, do a little bit more on the environmental side. We did do one on trade and climate last year. Please do let us know, let Andrew know, and we'll try and program that in perhaps a little bit later in the year. I'd like to come just to Julie first from the ABI, or anyone. There's got a couple of people from the ABI here, but Julie, maybe if I can pick on you first, because you are one offering an interesting view from an insurance risk point of view that I think is always good to bring to the table. So maybe I could bring you in on camera if you're there.
Hi Chris, hi everybody. Yeah, apologies, my camera isn't working. So I'd agree with a lot of the points that have been made so far about, in particular, about how well DIT has done in its trade agenda. It's been surprisingly positive, particularly with the recent agreement with Australia, which has one of the most kind of far-reaching kind of cross-border requirements secured for insurance. So that's been really, really welcome. In terms of sort of our priorities on the trade angle, we of course welcome the government's kind of focus on the FTAs, but in our experience, FTAs are not where we've seen progress being made in terms of trade liberalisation. We see kind of other tools being more useful, kind of using the soft kind of diplomacy angle of it. So we have annual financial and economic dialogues where we've seen huge progress being made with two of our focal markets, such as India and China. Looking to other markets, I mean, Canada and Switzerland, we're keenly kind of following the ongoing discussions on the mutual recognition agreements with Switzerland, and we're looking forward to the discussions with on the FTA with Canada. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thanks, Julie. That's great. And I'm just aware time is ticking along here. I'm just going to pull, if I can, come in on the trade skills. George, I think you are with us. I think you're having some technical problems, but there's obviously that trade skills is a big area that comes up regularly in trade conversations. So I think it's important that we all understand what's going on. Are you there, George? No, you must have dipped off. Okay, so well, just on that note, just very quickly, we are got a second meeting coming up with universities to commission a full audit on what kind of provision is in the market based on that recent EY report. So we'll keep you posted, but we're planning a full evidence session in the second term around June on trade skills. So if you're interested in any of that sort of area, do get in contact with Andrew. He's busy working on that project with George and others. Does anybody else in the last few minutes have any wider questions that we haven't covered? We've covered quite a lot of ground. Some, obviously, a lot of good consensus around DIT, which sounds very positive and warming to hear that. A number of issues and opportunities, and also some innovative work, isn't there, around key chapters in different deals, which is interesting. I would add the Singapore deal on the digital as a groundbreaking deal as well. So any questions, anybody, before I'm going to hand to Lord Waverley to provide some closing remarks. Thomas, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, hi Chris, thanks. Just in lieu of the trade justice movement or the TUC being around, I just wanted to present a couple of points from the perspective of civil society. I think generally there is a kind of fairly agnostic position on the existence of free trade agreements. We understand their use, but have some concerns about the extent to which the UK has failed to set out a clear idea of how these FTAs are going to promote human rights and international development, and also union rights. So we're still waiting to hear a clear view from DIT on what that would look like, and any support that the APPG could give to trying to put ministers' feet to the fire in terms of getting a trade strategy that has these kind of elements within it would be highly appreciated. Thanks.
Thanks very much, Thomas, and it's good to hear that civil society view. We're obviously quite aware of some of those issues. I've got 1 minute, so I'm going to go very quickly to Lloyd Russell, and then to Peter, and then hand over to Lord Waverley. Lloyd.
Hello, thank you for that. It's been very interesting. I'm a member on the Trade Committee, International Trade Committee in Parliament, and I think what you presented is great. You just sparked a thought in my mind there when you mentioned about the digital in Singapore, some of the other best bits. What would be really interesting is to do a piece of work to what are the gold standards in the respective bits of trade deals that we've agreed so far, that would combine to a kind of perfect looking trade deal with respective countries. Because we keep saying, well, there's some interesting bits on climate change that's being negotiated with New Zealand. There's some interesting bits of, kind of digital here. There's some interesting bits of et cetera, but it's all a bit scattergun. And it kind of feels like maybe someone needs to do a bit of work to pull it together and say, from a business perspective, this is our ideal look. From a trade union perspective, this is our ideal look. And can we square some of those circles so then we can be saying to government, this needs to be your baseline going into negotiations, not your endpoint. So we are constantly improving rather than just getting an interesting little bespoke bit on another one without consolidating some of the real successes we've got elsewhere.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Andrew, can we make a note of that as an action? That's an excellent thing, because there are now a cluster of FTAs where we can pull best practice out, can't we? So we could do that probably quite quickly, actually, with the help of everybody on this call. Peter.
Thank you, Chris. Peter Crowhurst, I'm the Chief Executive of the British Chamber of Commerce in Myanmar. Dodgy market, possibly. Challenging market, most definitely. But as Shevaun very kindly points out, that we have closed. We do SME business on a daily basis, and year to date we've closed 2 deals, despite being in a sanctioned environment. So all my colleagues in the busier region, the Britain and Southeast Asia region, whom we are communicating with almost daily, we are working together very closely and very able to bring in adequate and business together cost effectively. You can get into market very, very effectively, and probably COVID has made that a little bit easier for us because nobody could get to us, so it was all online. So we are closing deals. We are moving the needle a little bit towards supporting exports. That said, for Myanmar itself, we are obviously in a sanctioned environment. We have a team on the ground of 10 who are able to help navigate that and make sure you're doing business with the right people. So chambers right across the busier region are very much engaged in supporting that. And we all work very closely with DIT. And so that's it, really. So I'll close out there. If anyone wants to get in touch, please do. Most welcome.
Thanks very much, Peter. I know that network very well, actually, from old days in DIT, or what used to be UKTI. It is a very, very good, one of the most organised kind of chamber networks, actually British business group networks, I should say. Very, very supportive of that. Lord Waverley, I'm very aware of time. Sorry, I've cut into your last 5 minutes a little bit there. Hopefully that was of value. But can I just hand over to you to provide some closing remarks for the APPG?
I'll be a lot shorter than 5 minutes, Chris, but it really has been an excellent session. And as you said, it has come a lot. But the good standard of the participants today, the phrase made it, is to hear the voice of those not in Parliament really making the case that all of us in Parliament and government need to take note of and work together with all our friends here present. But there have been many trade priorities and policy issues that we've heard this afternoon. I personally have learned a lot and look forward to playing my part in the upcoming months in relation to these points that have been raised. But I'd like to thank you, Chris, very much. Theo, who may or may not be with us, for introducing the today, but to Andrew as well, who's done an excellent job and needs mention for all the work that he's done in putting this together. So in my mind, in listening to everything, what we've heard today, frankly, will help deliver a positive position for the UK around the world. It really will help us to get moving going forward. And we've got to ensure that the government are on message. Everyone's presence here has underlined that the APPG is being true to its form. And as I think it was Theo said, is about this issue about inclusiveness. It's very clear how important it is. It's been made from the remarks today. So all salient points that have been raised will be addressed. We have numbers of different mechanisms of doing this. And I suggest, Chris, at your convenience, that we meet up early next week with your team and to map out an active program with our friends in the House of Commons and to us up our end in the Lords. We've got an excellent opportunity. The CPTPP has been mentioned. That's a key issue for reasons that we don't need to go into all the detail here this afternoon. But we do have plenty of opportunities, and we've got to hold the government. They must be accountable. We must scrutinise their policies, and what we are all doing here today is helping to do that. In fact, Chris, I hope you will forward a copy of this video, if that's what you're doing, to the relevant people in the DIT, because they will learn from it as well. So really, it just serves me to say thank you, really a heartfelt thank you. We've come a long way since the conception of the APPG, and if we can deliver this in the same manner as which we have done from the time of the early days up until this point, if we can do that going forward, I congratulate you and everyone here else on this call, and just wish you all a very good weekend and look forward to working with you. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much. And just to close the meeting, we have 2 more of these scheduled, these sessions. We're doing 1 per parliamentary term. Do feedback if we can improve on it, if there's any in terms of the format, the way it's delivered, how we involve everybody. But the idea is we grow this approach and give everyone on both sides, external and in Parliament, the opportunity to really engage in detail with each other on the real issues that really matter, of which you are all the experts. So do feedback, but I really welcome the opportunity. Thank you so much for the time. And I look forward to seeing you at the next one, if not before, quite likely, I think. And Lord Waverley, I'll see you next week for sure, but I think that's already booked in. Thank you, everybody. Have a nice evening.
Thanks so much.
Thanks.